Okay, so well, I guess it's only if it was not true, but it's true. Testing genes for cancer, and this again is regarding, in a sense, testing and information. So we've talked about that genetic disease. This is Bioethics Across Cultures, chapter 3.4, testing for cancer gene susceptibility. Breast cancer kills more women than it does men, but it's a question that faces all in society. This section aims to consider genetic testing using the example of breast cancer, risks and benefits of genetic testing, and limitations of genetic testing. 3.41 Testing for cancer gene susceptibility. Genetic testing is based on knowing the genetic code of cells in our bodies. The genetic code in the form of chemical DNA determines everything from hair color to the way we digest food. Of course, the expression of the genotype into phenotype is modified. Mutations or changes to the structure of DNA can make us more susceptible to some diseases or disabilities. Even if you have a mutation, it may not mean you will get the disease, but just about you are more likely to get it. The link between having the mutation and the possibility of getting the disease is not well understood. For example, some genetic mutations interact with factors like a person's lifestyle or other environmental factors such as chemicals and sunlight. The technology for testing for some mutations is now available. Imagine that a simple blood test could tell you if you have a mutated gene that makes you susceptible to getting cancer. There may be the possibility that you could pass this mutation on to your unborn children. Genetic testing provides some opportunities to find out about possible health problems that may not happen for many years. Knowing whether you are more susceptible to a genetic disease gives you an opportunity to minimize the risks, for example, making lifestyle changes. Information from genetic testing is a powerful knowledge which raises important questions. Do we want to know what could go wrong with our health in the future? How accurately does it predict the future? Who should be informed and when? Could this knowledge be used against someone? Should people be told if they do not want to know? So there's a question: if your sister tests positive for BRCA1, BRCA1, would you recommend to her that she has her breasts or ovaries removed as a preventative measure? And we talked about the example of Angelina Jolie, who not only had her breasts removed but also her ovaries removed, so that it eliminates the risk of breast and ovarian cancer, which in her family was a very high risk. Now, so there are many genes which cause breast cancer and ovarian cancer, but some of them are quite often involved, but they're complex disorders. So it's up to people. If they have a certain, you usually know from your family history if you're at high risk. There are also obviously environmental factors. For example, why do so few Japanese women get breast cancer in Japan? But some of the Japanese Americans, when they switch to a Western lifestyle in the United States or other countries, in the second generation and so on, they get breast cancer at similar rates to whites. So it's there's clearly the food and environment and some other factors that trigger. And of course, there is this measure of luck. We talked about predestination, fate, and luck. Actually, in Western culture, generally genetic disease is considered a bad luck. But in so many Asian culture, for example in Japan, it's considered somebody's fault. And of course we can try and educate people and say it's not your fault, but that's how people may feel. And it sort of relates also to this culture of blame, and you get what you have had with some problem. Now that feeling is of course common. Now we had some people discussing a religion before, but you can see this, for example, in the Old Testament in the Bible, a lot of references that you and your 7 generations or many generations in the future will be punished for what you did. Okay, which is clearly a sort of a punishment thing. The same, it's the same as you can see in karma. And if you remember the presentations of the research on karma, that most people, in fact 97% of the people in the survey on fortune telling, they believed in karma, no matter what their religion was. They believed in karma. So if you believe in karma, then that's basically what it's saying. There is even things, one of the interesting things is a gene for a morning sneeze. Now, I have probably this allele for a morning sneeze, and but only certain times of the year. But every morning I will sneeze. You'll find this in some people, and they found a genetic allele linked to this. So all sorts of things. But of course, if you have allergies or if you have a cold or some environment, you're just going to trigger it in the same or even stronger method. So this chapter may be useful for you for when teaching. It's a trash and treasure activity. A researcher must dig to find words to help answer the question, treasure, and toss aside unnecessary sentences, phrases, words, ideas as trash, because they do not answer the questions and therefore are unimportant to this context. And this is a chapter written by Lindsay Connor, who's a professor in University of Canterbury in New Zealand. So you can do this at some point. In the future, choose a question from the list below, write it on a piece of paper. So A, what are the advantages of being screened for breast cancer gene BRCA1? And B, why do women who are tested need counselling? C, what are the implications for a person who is tested to be positive for the gene? D, what are the implications if the test is negative? 1, scan the text. C4.3, sentence by sentence, to find the answer. Does this sentence answer the question? A, B, C, and D. And 2, if it does not answer the question, it is trash. Go on to the next sentence. 3, if it does answer the question, treasure it by writing down the words or phrases that answer the question. Continue to read the text until you've finished sorting the trash and treasure, and make sure you keep all the trash and treasure as notes. So this is the exercise. There are some teacher guidelines written there. And so you can see that this is a procedure that can be used as a discriminatory strategy with any text. It explains to students that a researcher must dig to find words to help answer the questions, treasure, and toss aside unnecessary sentences, phrases, words, ideas as trash, because they do not answer the questions and therefore are unimportant in the context. The idea is to help students who are focusing a question to search the text. Now, if you're writing a thesis, for example, you may want to do this through many papers. So you demonstrate the method using a paragraph or information on the topic, you choose a question, write on the board, and then use the text. So let's look at, I want to read through 4.3 BRCA testing. Changes to the gene BRCA1 have been linked to breast and ovarian cancer. BRCA1 is a tumor suppressor gene. Tumor suppressors are genes that control cell growth. When enough cells in an area have grown, tumor suppressors tell the cells to stop growing. When the genes don't work properly, as in case of mutated BRCA1 genes, the signal to stop growing is not given, or not always given. Growth continues out of control and tumors can result. To test for a BRCA1 mutation, a blood sample is taken and a specific change on the chromosome 17q21 is searched for. Only 5% of women with breast cancer are thought to actually have this particular mutation. So although it's called BRCA1, it's only about 5% of women with breast cancer have this mutation. But there can be other mutations. And there's also a BRCA2, a second gene, and a few others. Genetic testing can lead to early detection that could help to prolong and save life. The information would cause havoc if it was misused or misunderstood. When a woman is told that she carries a gene, she has the following options. She could simply monitor her health. In the case of ovarian cancer, this may not be enough, as often the symptoms do not appear until it is too late. She could choose to have preventative mastectomy, surgery to remove her breasts, or hysterectomy, surgery to remove either just the ovaries or the uterus and the ovaries. Making a decision and having an operation can cause stress, of course. People deal with stress in different ways. Some people become devastated. This may lead to anxiety attacks, depression, or even heart disease. Some people, even if they cannot change their future, find this sort of information beneficial. The more they know, the more their anxiety level goes down. But there are others who cope by avoiding, who would rather stay hopeful and optimistic and not have difficult questions answered. Some people feel they would have more control over their health if they knew they had inherited a defective gene. Some women might choose to have their children early in life and then proceed with a hysterectomy. And others feel they simply could not adjust to a positive test result. This type of testing can have enormous implications on future employment or health and life insurance eligibility. Suppose a person learned that they had a predisposition to cancer. Would they be forced to inform their employers or insurers about test results? Potential employers may hold this information against them and not offer them the job. If insurance companies were given this information, premiums would increase for those at risk and life insurance may be denied. There are also implications should a person feel negative. As a result, might lead to people feeling that they will not get cancer, complacency. A woman might decide not to monitor her health carefully, neglecting the early detection practices such as self-exam and mammography, feeling that she is safe from this cancer. Complacency would be especially harmful if the test results were actually a false negative. It's estimated that less than 1 in 10 cases of cancer results from inherited gene mutations. Most cancers are not the result of inherited factors. Even if a mutation in the gene for a particular cancer is inherited, for example BRCA1 gene for breast cancer, the gene will not always develop. Also, both men and women without the gene can also develop breast cancer. Okay, so these are some of the questions. And I think we have seen, as I mentioned, the complexity of this. Some discussion: if your sister tests positive for the BRCA1 gene, would you recommend to her that she has her breast or ovaries removed as a preventative measure? What information does the article give to help you answer each question? And question 4, is it illegal in your country to use a blood sample for genetic testing even though the sample was taken for another reason? Now, in some countries that's illegal, in others it's just unethical. Question 5 was looking at some risks and limitations. Now, we have some limitations written on the next page. 1, the current range of tests does not look for and cannot detect all disease-forming mutations and susceptibilities to genetic disorders. 2, there are no cures or treatments currently available for some diseases that can be diagnosed or predicted by genetic testing. 3, even if a mutation known to be associated with some diseases is absent, the disease may still develop. 4, there's a possibility that test results are not correct. It's a human error. 5, some mutations are very variable. Many changes in the same gene can result in a disorder like cystic fibrosis. Several different mutations can lead to the same disorder. And different people have mutations in that gene, different mutations, they still have the same disease. They may have different variations, of course, on the pattern of expression and timing. Risks. People may experience psychological anxiety when they are told they have susceptibility to a genetic disorder. 2, there's a huge risk of misunderstanding and anxiety when people who have been tested do not get skilled counseling. There's a need to train health professionals on how to do this. 3, the results of testing can strain your family relationships, especially if family members do not want to know the implications for them. Family members may withhold information that could have implications for the rest of the family. And 4, genetic information about individuals is very sensitive. Failure to protect this information could have far-reaching effects on their well-being. For example, could lead to social and economic discrimination. So these are some of the limitations of breast cancer screening. Many of these actually apply to other tests, and I want to discuss several other examples. Now, we have discussed prenatal genetic testing, testing of a fetus for a disease or embryo. Last week, a paper was published by a professor from Cambridge in the UK, who has published a paper finding that 1/4 of cells taken through chorionic villi sampling, which is called CVS, chorionic villi sampling, 1/4 of the positives for a Down syndrome taken by CVS were incorrect with the fetus. Okay, so 25% problem, meaning 25% of the samples that were positive, actually the fetus was normal. How did that happen? How does it happen? And in fact, the professor said she had had exactly the same case with her son, who's normal and born, and that's what had made her start this research program. The reason was they were taking cells from in CVS largely from the placenta, and the placenta, it turns out, has a higher frequency of chromosome abnormalities than the fetus. Now, both come from the same embryo, but through after cell division in the early embryo, the cells that lead to the placenta and to the embryo are different. And so if you're taking samples from the placenta, usually you'd think these would be the same as the fetus, but not always. And 25% false positive from CVS means we can imagine, sadly, in the last 40 years that CVS has been widely used, how many mothers had an abortion of fetus which they thought had Down syndrome, which actually the placenta had the mutation and not the fetus. So it's a really sad thing. And that's why biopsies were often done of the aborted fetus to try and work out exactly if it was correct or not, and that's part of the reason they detected this. Now, what they can do, of course, is direct fetal sampling. Taking some cell from the fetus is the only absolute way to be sure. Amniotic sampling, amniotic fluid, is more likely to be from the fetus, so that error rate is not found. But CVS was one of the reasons it was used. It could be done earlier in pregnancy. And that's why it was used for early diagnosis. And sadly, the result was there was often mixed placental samples that were being taken. Okay, so that's just a lesson on limitation. All tests have false positives and false negatives. The same is true for genetic tests. So it's better to have a verification. Now also, we discussed before alpha-fetoprotein screening. Alpha-fetoprotein screening is a biochemical test in some countries used for all pregnancies, and high levels of this, there's actually three of different proteins that can be combined, and their results are indicative of a higher risk of fetal abnormality, especially Down syndrome or spina bifida. Now, spina bifida frequency has been reduced a lot because of folic acid supplements in the last 20 years or 30 years. So spina bifida, fortunately, is much less than it used to be, and it was largely quite a strong influence from deficiency in folic acid. But the early use of this testing could be used, the triple test for protein could be used. Now what is of course available right now is taking a blood sample from the mother to test the fetal cells, and it's becoming reliable. We saw actually the test being used, so you can get fetal cells from the mother's blood, and then you don't need to put a needle into the fetus or into the amniocentesis or ultrasound. Initially you can use just a maternal blood screening and look for fetal cells. So this is making it easier, but again you have to sort out the cells. This was actually being discussed 25 years ago when I wrote the book Shaping Genes, which you can find on the website. We were discussing when fetal cell testing from the mother would be accurate. But the thing is, now some companies have got commercial kits and probably it is reasonably accurate. It should of course be verified. We can also ask, will this be possible in developing countries? Are the costs of these tests too expensive? And the answer is, many of the costs are not too expensive. We can find ways to make it cheaper. Ultrasound has, of course, use at a later stage, but there will be more and more tests which will find this clearly looking at the genes, because the strong role the genes and chromosomes play is being one of the strongest methods. Okay, so that is some examples of genetic testing. I'd like to stop for a discussion now.